Okay, I think we're ready to go now. Okay, well, we'd like to welcome everyone who's here with us tonight. We welcome those who were here last time. We welcome you back. And if you're here for the first time, we welcome you as well. We're so glad to have all of you with us tonight. And I have to say that I feel relieved with the decision in the case of George Floyd today. Um, to me, it confirms that racial justice and racial equity can have a new narrative in the United States. Um, so, with that said, we would like to continue our series on racism, learning, dialogue, and healing tonight. And we will continue with the history of Black people in America. We'll have two presenters from the parish, Rudy Gutierrez and Gillian Parham, whom I will introduce a little later. Before going further, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation comes to you on the ancestral land of the Menomonee Native American tribe, part of the Algonquin language family. We honor and thank the elders past and present for their stewardship of the land. Last week, we focused on the Catholic social teaching of the dignity of the human person, which is really the foundation of our moral teachings. And today we will focus on solidarity. This is a statement from the United States Catholic bishops. We are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, or ideological differences. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. Pope John Paul VI famously said, "If you want peace, work for justice." Our love for all sisters and brothers demands that we promote peace in a world surrounded by violence and conflict. To be in solidarity means we are connected to all of our sisters and brothers around the world. When one person or group suffers, we all suffer. Racism is the opposite of solidarity. Solidarity goes beyond tolerance to friendship and love. And I just like to tell you a little story about that. When I was a student at St. Francis Seminary, one of my classmates, who was also a Catholic school teacher at that time, gave a presentation on this theology. And she was rather astounded when she said, all these years I've been teaching tolerance to my students, and I had been doing the same thing. And then we realized it goes beyond that to friendship and love. So our eyes were opened at that moment. Because just to tolerate means that we put up with something or we endure something. But friendship goes a lot farther, and love as well. And in John's gospel, Jesus said, "I call you friends." In a friendship relationship, there is choice, there's mutuality, and there's deep sharing. One question we can ask ourselves is, does our friend group represent diversity? I know I have a ways to go in that department. Part of the work of anti-racism, which is to oppose racism and work for change, is to spend time with people of color, get to know them, to build a relationship. That may involve volunteering, going to a worship service other than our own, to a restaurant or other business owned by a Black person. One thing I have been doing since the pandemic started is when I go to the grocery store, I look for the line where there are Black employees, and I get in that checkout line. And at the end of the checkout time, I thank them for being essential workers, and I try to call them by name. And I ask them how they're doing. And usually I can see that they're touched by that. And sometimes I even get a smile. It's just a small thing, but it's something we can do. So at this point, we're just going to break out for about 5 minutes. We ask that you introduce yourselves to one another. Marguerite will put us into groups. And If you were here last time and you did any of the follow-up activities, you could talk about that. If you didn't, just talk about something that you read or heard about race, recently. Would like to introduce our first speaker. He is a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, born in Green Bay, but moved to the Milwaukee and Waukesha area as a child. He spent most of his life in southeastern Wisconsin. He's been a member of Good Shepherd since 2006 and was drawn to our parish because of our mission of social justice. He's been a teacher for 22 years, currently teaching at St. John the Evangelist Catholic School in Greenfield. However, most of his teaching was done at Brookfield East High School. He has a bachelor's degree in education and history and a master's degree in history, all from UWM. His master's thesis was Catholic Protest in the Vietnam War, which introduced him to Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker Movement, and that coincided with his return to the Catholic Church in 2004. He is the son of Puerto Rican immigrants, and his ethnicity is 100% Puerto Rican. Both his parents were born and raised on the island. He has 5 siblings, all living in the United States. His father passed away over 30 years ago, but his mother recently turned 91 years old, and he attributes her long life to her passionate practice as a lifelong Catholic. And Rudy is inspired by her faith. So please join me in welcoming Rudy Gutierrez.
Today's session is Reconstruction to Racism. Reconstruction is a period of time from 1865 to 1877. So it's right after the Civil War, because the Civil War ended in 1865. And going back to this period of time because we need to take a look at how a lot of these problems that have been in society for a while were embedded in the past. As I mentioned, here's with the slide Reconstruction from a period of time that I mentioned. Overview of the section, we'll start off with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. 13th Amendments abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment put a definition of what a citizen is in the Constitution. That way, it gave more rights, or theoretically more rights, to African Americans, because it explained that they were citizens as well. The most important is probably the 15th Amendment, because that theoretically, again, gave African American males the right to vote. Regardless of your previous servitude or your race, you have the right to vote as long as you were a male back at the time. Other things that are going to be included in this session are the Black Codes, sharecropping, the KKK, and African American politicians during this 12-year period. This is a video on the KKK. The KKK comes about during the Reconstruction period. Then they die down as you get close to the turn of the century, late 1880s, but probably more the 1890s and even the early 1900s. They come back in the early 1920s, and strange enough, they come back as a very strong, like ultra-conservative moral group. People like former President Warren Harding as part of the KKK. Hugo Black, who's one of the more liberal members of the Supreme Court, becomes part of the KKK because they were looking to be good husbands, good family men, don't drink. So it came back in that context for a very, very short time because underneath the foundation of the hate group was still kind of lurking, and the the benefits of the morality group that had come about quickly went down. That went down the tube, so to speak, and the hate group came back up to the forefront.
Ku Klux Klan membership soared to 4 million in the 1920s.
Almost everybody that was a good citizen in the South was a member of the Klan. I think they were encouraging morality by turning the light on immorality and deceit and unfairness.
It created a great deal of, I'd say, consternation and debate and so on. They were not just opposed to the blacks, but they were opposed to the Catholics and the Jews or anybody else that came somewhere. Going to people's houses and calling them out and insulting them and whipping them and things of that kind. This was not just peculiar to the South at Alabama, it was nationwide.
The Klan was actively recruiting in many northern states.
My father was asked if he would like to join the Ku Klux Klan. He grabbed the guy by the collar and threw him down the stairs. 3 nights later, almost directly across the street, there was a large cross burning. I still can see it in my mind. It was a dreadful, horrifying experience. My mother said, "It's just as though they're guarding the gates of hell."
Those white people who catered to us and were in sympathy with us, they caught hell too.
James Cameron was living in Indiana when he and 2 childhood friends were seized by a Klan-inspired mob, enraged by reports of the rape and murder of a white couple.
Many of them out in the crowd had the robes and hood on too. And then the leader said, "Take all these niggas out and hang them."
His 2 friends were lynched. James Cameron barely escaped with his life.
They put a rope around my neck and they threw the other end over the tree. And I kept crying and hollering, "I haven't done anything." But before they could hang me up, a voice said, "Take this boy back. He had nothing to do with any killing or raping." I looked up to heaven and I said, "Lord, have mercy."
Throughout the decade, an estimated 200 people were lynched by the Klan. This organization, claiming to uphold the values and virtues of the past, became so powerful in the 1920s that it seized political control in 7 states. And in 1927, Klansmen marched, 50,000 strong, down the streets of the nation's capital. Clearly, the forces of 20s modernity had stirred a bitter resistance.
Okay, quick word on the last video that we just saw, showing again the KKK and some of the things that I mentioned. It also showed James Cameron, and Mr. Cameron is the founder of the Black Holocaust Museum that's here in Milwaukee, the only one in the country, if I'm not mistaken. Again, he had moved here, and Mr. Cameron actually passed away around 5-6 years ago. He was Catholic. His funeral was there at the Cathedral of St. John's downtown Milwaukee. So what I have up there at this point is sharecropping and black coats. So these were different things that were used against African Americans to keep them in a position of servitude. Black codes were different laws that were implemented when Reconstruction was failing, and it went after Reconstruction, basically saying that, again, African Americans could not testify against whites. They had virtually no rights, no land rights, and they were able to use these in the South because the Southern power structure had come back up to the forefront. Sharecropping too was a way of keeping African Americans and some poor whites tied to the land. They would rent out a plot of land, and then they would have to again farm their own plot and then give X amount to the owner of the plot. The reason that was very difficult was because, they had to buy their own tools, buy everything that they needed. And since they virtually never had any money, it was bought on credit. And then the credit was used to keep African Americans in a situation of servitude. Extremely high interest rates, payments that were made that were all of a sudden lost. So things of this nature kept African Americans in a situation of servitude from the 1870s, actually up to around the 1940s. This is going to be a video that talks about the theoretical aspects of African Americans voting, the fact that constitutionally it was in there, even though they really couldn't use the vote because of violence against them.
Campaign. The right to vote would also prove elusive for America's 9 million blacks. Black men could vote in theory, but in fact most were barred by white intimidation, poll taxes, and literacy tests. 85% of black Americans lived in poverty in the southern United States, segregated from whites by so-called Jim Crow laws, laws upheld by the Supreme Court that all but wiped out the freedom and equality once promised by emancipation.
It is the complete denial of the American dream. They cannot go to the same schools with whites. They can't drink from the same drinking fountains. They cannot sit in the same part of a streetcar or in the same cars on a railroad. It's a horrible time. White politicians compete with each other in the South for being more, at least verbally, violent toward African Americans, and in many cases are encouraging or at least abetting actual violence.
They were lynching blacks for hardly a week. There's 2 or 3 blacks didn't get lynched or burned at the stake. I don't know whether you heard that or not. You ever hear of any black people being burned at the stake? Well, that's what happened. I would live in those days.
Okay, so again, that video shows a large part of the problems that were, again, occurring to African Americans in its early 1900s, going up to the 1920s, and again, the fallacy of a free society. And this particular clip is with the KKK. It's really disturbing given the fact that they were founded in around 1865, 1866, and here we are in 2021, and now you have neo-KKK, and actually a lot of the hate groups that are around these days, they really sprung up again in the 1980s. Again, these were not just threats, as we well know, the fact that they time and time again would kill and lynch different people and threaten them, and with things that you knew they would actually do. So again, extremely, extremely violent and problematic for a lot of African Americans in the South for a very, very long time. African American gains and politicians. You did have some good things that happened in the early part of Reconstruction, up to like around 1870, 1871. You had Hiram Revels, who becomes a senator in Mississippi, and Blanche Bruce does as well. They start, addressing some different needs for African Americans, but this is short-lived. Little by little, the former Southern structure power people came back up to the forefront, and little by little, they were able to gain control again and basically wipe out the small gains that African Americans had at this particular time. This next video is from American History X, and I really like the video because of the fact that the person speaking is the actor Edward Norton Jr., and he speaks about a lot of things that I hear a lot from people in terms of it's been such a long time, why can't African Americans get their act together, so on and so forth. This is like around 4 or 5 years after the Rodney King beatings in Los Angeles. That's when the movie was made. So take a little look.
For this fucking total son of a bitch. I mean, it blows my mind. We're so hung up on this notion that we have some obligation to help the struggling black man, cut him some slack until he can overcome these historical injustices. It's crap. This stuff you guys are saying just perpetuates it. All this liberal nonsense, everyone's turning and looking the other way while our country rots from the inside out. Christ, Lincoln freed the slaves, like 130 years ago? How long does it take to get your act together?
Well, Jews have been persecuted for over 5,000 years. Are you saying that it's wrong to feel sensitive about anti-Semitism?